Hello again. The idea of honor in Book 12 of Homer's Odyssey. That's what we're going to focus on here. And let me just get this all set up. Okay, I'm going to try to move a little more quickly as we get to the end here. In Book 12, Odysseus returns to Circe, who gives him instructions on how to sail for home. And in this last part of the story, of his story to the Phaeacians, we have some more indications of what makes Odysseus unique among his men. And I'm suggesting you could tie this to his sense of honor. So Odysseus alone is the one who gets to hear the voice of the sirens. All the other men must fill their ears with wax, but Odysseus binds himself to the mast without waxing his ears so that he can listen. The siren song bewitches the men. Once they hear it, they forget home, they forget how to live, they become fixated by the beauty of the voice, and they die of starvation all alone. So for the ordinary man, the one who does not live for honor, he cannot hear the song because the song becomes his obsession. It overwhelms his passion for beauty and pleasure. By contrast, Odysseus gets to hear the song, but he is able to resist it. There is something in him that is stronger than the desire for beauty or for the comforts of the life of pleasure. Odysseus is able to appreciate the beauty of the siren's voice without being moved to desire it, or without being seduced by it. Something else drives Odysseus, the promise of homecoming, but by now he knows that this will be painful, so it's not pleasure that he seeks or desires, it's not happiness, it's something else, one could argue. It is a sense of honor. In some ways this makes Odysseus less than sympathetic. You know, he's the one who gets to hear the song but not enjoy it. In any case, we have a contrast between the men and Odysseus. And Odysseus, I'm suggesting, is identified more with this idea of honor. When Circe tells him to stay close to Scylla's rock in order to avoid the great danger of Charybdis, or the greater danger of Charybdis, Odysseus cries out, "I beg you, goddess, tell me, is there any way I can escape from Charybdis and still protect my men from the other?" To which Circe replies, "There you go again, always the hero." Okay, here we have the idea of the hero tied to Odysseus explicitly. Well, what kind of heroicism do we see here? Here, Odysseus's willingness to risk his life to save all the men is what's being highlighted. Circe suggests that he choose the path that will involve sacrificing half the men. That's her suggestion. In order to avoid the worst outcome in which all the men die. So Scylla, sailing towards Scylla, will result in half the men getting eaten, whereas if they sail towards Charybdis, everyone will die. That's Circe's advice. But Odysseus is not satisfied with that outcome, even though it will protect him from dying. He wants to find the option that will save all the men. He wants to be the hero, as Circe says. He doesn't just want to survive or to give himself the best chance of surviving. If he survives, but without doing everything in his power to save all the men, then he will have acted dishonorably. That's my suggestion here. And it's better to die than to act dishonorably. This is the mark of the hero, or the honorable one. It's also the quality, this heroic quality is also what puts the men at danger at times, right? This desire to be the hero gets the men in trouble. It's what makes him kind of dangerous to the men at some level. So there's sort of two sides to this story in a way, and then it's a kind of a complex quality, this quality of the hero, this quality of the honorable one. Also, Odysseus doesn't find a way to protect his men from dying. He tries, but he fails. All of his men die. So his heroic quality doesn't really achieve the desired end. But it does mark him as different, as unique, as special. There's also the scene that I asked you to write about last week, okay? This is the scene where Odysseus and his remaining crew arrive at the harbor of the island of Thrinacia, the island where the cattle of Helios graze. They're exhausted and afraid. They have seen their comrades die one by one, and they're tired of this journey. They're tired of Odysseus. They just want to rest. They're hungry, very hungry, and Odysseus recalls the warnings to shun the island and the cattle. He reminds his men of the warning, and he urges them to sail, to go out to sea again, to set sail again. and leave the island, right? But then Eurylochus speaks up. Eurylochus speaks up and challenges Odysseus, speaks out against Odysseus, as he did earlier in Book 10, right, when they first arrived on Circe's island. He says, "You're a hard man, Odysseus, stronger than other men, and you never wear out, a real Iron Man who won't allow his crew, dead tired from rowing and lack of sleep, to set foot on shore where men might make a meal we could enjoy." Right? They want to eat the cattle. The men side with Eurylochus, right? They think Odysseus is wearing them out. And Odysseus has in some sense lost his men's confidence at this point. So he agrees to go to the island with the rest of the crew, but on one condition. He gets them to make an oath not to eat the cattle. And they renew that oath on the first night they spend on the island after they feast on all the food that Circe gave them. Circe gives them food to eat, and they feast on that. And they renew the oath not to eat the cattle of the sun. But then they end up stranded on the island. The storm comes and the winds blow and they can't set sail. And so they're there for a month. And they run out of all the food that Circe gave them. And they start hunting and fishing to survive. At this point, Odysseus goes up onto the mountain to pray for his men. He sees that they're getting restless, and he falls asleep. Right? The moment he falls asleep is the moment he's not in control anymore, the moment he's not sort of defending the honor of the men, or however you want to put it. And while he's sleeping, Eurylochus comes in and makes his speech. "Listen to me, shipmates," he says, "despite your distress. All forms of death are hateful, but to die of hunger is the most wretched way to go. What are we waiting for? Let's drive off the prime beef in that herd and offer sacrifice." And he makes this speech while Odysseus is sleeping. And the men are persuaded by these words. They're exhausted, they're hungry, they're afraid for their life, and they break down and eat the cattle. They're tired of hunting for their food. And for this, they all pay the price of death at sea, right? Zeus masses the clouds and sends the storm that destroys the ship and kills all the men. I mean, they set sail, but then Zeus destroys them. All but Odysseus, right? Odysseus is the only one who survives. He washes up on the shore of Calypso's island, right? And then, so that's, we know the story from there. But this is seen as in some sense a form of divine justice, of retribution for dishonoring the sun god, Helios. Interestingly, Zeus defends the honor of a Titan here. But what makes this act so dishonorable? After all, the men were only doing what they thought was necessary to survive. I think there's a lot to say here, but I'm curious what you think. But here's one point you could make. The men break their oath. Right? They go against their word. And for the Greeks, without his word, a man's life is worthless. It's better to die than to break one's oath in order to survive. Because some ways of surviving are worse than death. And it's recognizing that's part of what it means to live a life of honor, to recognize that there are ways of surviving that are worse than death. You could also say that the men did not do everything in their power to survive without breaking their oath. Right? There's things they could have done to avoid breaking their oath. They could have continued hunting. It wasn't necessary that they eat the cattle. It was just more expedient. Right? It was easier. So they chose the most expedient means to survive over keeping their oath. And that shows a lack of honor. I think is the argument here. But of course, we can sympathize with the men here, right? Their failing is a very human failing. And in their defense, they do offer to make it up to Helios by building a temple to him if and when they return to Ithaca. But this is not enough, right? The fact that they're even willing to consider eating the cattle shows a lack of respect for the gods or for the idea of boundaries that we agree to honor in order to maintain a sense of balance and order and harmony in society. So do Odysseus's men deserve to die for this? Well, from our perspective, no, probably not. But Homer is trying to show us what it takes to preserve a sense of honor in society. And so that's how the story has to be. This will all set up the question that I have for you guys this week, which I'll post on the discussion board, where I ask you to think about the idea of honor in relation to Circe's text. To Miller's novel, Circe. Okay, that's all for now. Bye.